was like, I want to cry because I've been reading way too much romance lately. I can't believe it's a debut novel because it's just so good. I told my friends specifically that I was not going to read this book. Yes, I was scared throughout reading the whole book, although the book isn't scary. Like, it literally isn't scary. Hello, my friends. We're a quarter way through the year, and so far I've read 10 books. They're mostly romance genres, which is kind of funny because I don't really like romance anymore. I used to be a big romance fan when I was back in grade school, middle school, and the beginning of high school. Starting off, the first book I read this year was Dial A for Aunties. Dial A for Aunties is about this girl who goes on this date with this man that her mom sets her up with. The man tries to touch her, and obviously in self-defense, they got into this car accident and she kills the dude. And then the whole book just talks about how her mom and her aunt are trying to hide the body or like get rid of it. There's also a love interest that she was in love with in college. He was gonna go separate ways for his job, and she broke up with him, but of course she still loves him, and she meets him again, and then there's this like whole side love story going on. I rated it 2 to 2.5 stars. Not super big fan, I think, because I understood a lot of the cultural references, being Asian myself, and I kind of felt like the author just tried to put every stereotype into this book, and I was cringing a bit. Like, the way these characters are written in the book kind of feel like how an American would look at, I guess, Asian aunties that came from East Asia, and it kind of made me a little bit uncomfortable, so not a big fan. And I also wasn't a big fan of the whole, like, how they got into that situation, because she definitely could have called the police. I understand that she panicked and stuff, but just how everything unfolded felt a little bit unrealistic. I wasn't really interested in the love interest either. It's kind of funny sometimes. Next book I read was Book Lovers by Emily Henry. What is Book Lovers about? Okay, so it's about this girl. She's a book agent, and then there's this editor. They're kind of not really enemies, but they don't really like each other. Main character's sister, younger sister, is like, oh my gosh, we should go on this trip, just me and you. And her younger sister makes this whole list of things to do because the main character doesn't really do like fun things. And then what do you know? In this town, the editor is also there. He's like running his family's bookshop, and they banter. They fall in love. I actually really liked the first part of the book where they were bantering and kind of not real, I wouldn't say like getting on each other's nerves, but kind of just like bickering at each other. But then the last half of the book, I wasn't a big fan of after when they got together, because I felt like the banter between them just kind of disappeared. I get that you're in love, but also I'm here for the back and forth. These disagreements, these conversations. Yeah, there wasn't much of that after they got together, and I was bored, I guess, because I wasn't a super big fan of the love interest. I also wasn't a super big fan of the main character. I guess I wasn't a big fan of the sister either. So all of the characters in the book, I didn't really love. I was more interested in the relationship between the main character and the sister, because there was a little bit of tension there at the end. The relationship between the main character and the love interest. But yeah, first out the book, loved it. I would have given it a 4-star rating, but after the ending was a little bit underwhelming, so at the end I gave it like a 3 stars, 3.25 out of 5 stars. Next book I read was the whole Heartstopper series. I think everyone has heard about Heartstopper. I'm a little bit late to the whole trend. I read the whole series, and then I also watched the Netflix adaptation afterwards. Heartstopper is a queer romance between two boys, and they're in high school. I would say kind of like a coming of age story. Very cute, very heartwarming. I loved the whole series. I actually read it all in one go, and I normally don't read graphic novels, and I normally don't like reading series, just because I feel like once I'm done with a book, I want to be done. But this whole series, I binged it because I loved the characters so much. Every single character in that book, I loved. Even like the bad guys, I didn't love them, but I loved the way they contributed to the storyline. They're just so cute. And I love them so much. So if you haven't read it, you should definitely read it. It's super short. You can get through it in like literally one day. Warms my heart. The next book I read was All the Bright Places. So I actually already read this book, I think back when I was in grade 6 or 7 when it came out. And then I reread it because someone on TikTok reading it and saying it made them cry. And I was like, I want to cry because I've been reading way too much romance lately. And I remember reading this book the first time when I was younger and not really understanding the premise around it, not really understanding why it was such a big deal, kind of, and just giving it a meh rating. And now the second time I read it, I didn't rate it super high. I gave it 3 out of 5, but it did make me feel more and understand what was going on with the book. I definitely cried at the end. I forgot the characters' names, but the guy in the book, I kind of have mixed feelings about him. I love him as a character, and I understand why the girl loves him too, but parts of it I understand also from like the parents' perspective of why he's a little bit problematic and why the parents don't want the girl to keep seeing this boy. But I also understand from the girl's perspective why she loves him and like wants to save him and wants to be with him. And 3 out of 5 stars. Good book. Next, I read The Poppy War. Oh my gosh, I will never stop raving about The Poppy War. It is so good. When I picked up reading again, I read a couple fantasy books and I just did not vibe with fantasy. I used to love fantasy. I was a Sarah J. Maas kid. I was like, back in grade school, I was so into Sarah J. Maas. And then now looking back, I'm like, this is not the books for me. And I thought I didn't like any fantasy at all until I read The Poppy War. Maybe it's not fantasy, but more magical realism. But I love the magic elements in it. It was way more of like a different vibe. It was more about gods and gaining superpowers instead of fairies and fays and that kind of stuff. I can't believe it's a debut novel because it's just so good. I loved it. But The Poppy War is about this girl. She's a war orphan and she doesn't want to be married off to this really old rich guy. And the only way to get out of it is to get into this super prestigious school where the students become generals, I think. I don't really remember the term, but they just guide armies in the war. So, she studies her ass off. She gets into this really prestigious school, but because she came from a different background than everybody else, where most of the students who go to that school are from really prestigious families, all of their families are like also generals in the army, and they've had training and they've been in school since basically they were born, whereas the main character like grew up in this really poor town and she was running this like rundown shop and selling opium. Their upbringings were very different, but the main character is this girl who is super feisty, and she is definitely the type of girl who, if she wants something, she will go to great lengths to get it, and she will study really hard, and she'll do basically anything to achieve her goals. It talks about racism, it talks about discrimination, and a little bit of politics, kind of a bunch of other things. I'm not great at analyzing literature. I just read for fun, so this was definitely a really good book, and I loved all the elements in it. I loved all the characters. They were so thought out. I was able to distinguish every single character. They each had a purpose. They each affected the main character in a different way. Also loved like the internal battles that the main character has. So yeah, definitely read it. It's so good. 5 out of 5 stars. It is the best book I think I've read this year so far. Okay, next I read One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. This is funny because I told my friends specifically that I was not going to read this book because of the mixed reviews I saw, and I was actually already reading Red, White, and Royal Blue from the same author. This is like a more, I would say, well-liked book than One Last Stop. I'm still reading it. I'm only like halfway through, but I did finish One Last Stop in 2 days, and I loved this book. I gave it 3.25 out of 5 stars. It's definitely very feel good. It's another queer romance between two girls, and it's about this girl who moved to New York for school. She's trying to find out who she is as a person, because her whole life she's been helping her mom try to find her mom's missing older brother. And all she knew growing up is just like deceiving people so that her mom can get files that she needed, how to like look up cases, reading through newspapers, police documents, things like that. So her upbringing wasn't very common. It wasn't very normal. So she wanted to detach from her mom because her mom is still on this whole case about her mom's older brother, still trying to find her older brother. And she moves into this apartment. This apartment has, I guess, a little bit of a magic vibe. I loved all the roommates, all of them. One of them's a psychic. The other one's this art girly who went to college to be an engineer, and then she decided to pursue art instead. And I resonated with that. Oh, the first two are in a relationship. And the last roommate, he's a little bit, I guess, on the shyer side. On the, not shyer, maybe quieter side. But yeah, so main character takes a subway to school, and then one day, on the first day on the subway to school, she sees this really hot girl on the subway, and instantly she falls in love with her. And every time she goes on the subway, the same subway, she sees the same girl, and they start talking, they kind of get to know each other, and then the main character figures out that this girl is stuck on the subway. The rest of the book, she's trying to figure out how to get her off the subway. I loved Jane. Jane's the girl on the subway. I definitely had a massive crush on her while I was reading the book. She is so witty. She is so just cool. I just love her as a character so much. Things I didn't like, it would have been a 4-star read for me, but I ended up rating it a 3.5. The third act conflict kind of came out of nowhere. I understand why Jane would feel hesitant about getting off the subway. I kind of feel like it came out of nowhere. The main character just got on the subway one day, and then suddenly Jane was like, she did a whole 180 for like a couple chapters, and then it was fine again. And I was kind of like, I was not prepared for that, and I didn't see that coming, and it kind of felt out of character a bit, so I didn't love that part. Also, I wasn't a super big fan of the main character. I understand why she's the main character, and I understand her personality and the way she reacts to stuff, but again, her personality is just a little bit bland, and I understand why. I just didn't love it. But I loved every other character, so I made up for that. A quarter way through the book, I kind of felt like a lot of the traits mentioned in the book about the people in the book were a little bit cliche, a little bit too stereotypical. It kind of took me aback a bit because I was kind of like, I don't know how I feel about this, but I quickly got used to it. Like, that's a quirky thing about this book. So that was One Last Stop. That was 3 out of 5 stars. Very good read. I'm surprised I actually finished this book in 2 days. And I'm still reading Red, White, and Royal Blue, so I should probably get this book finished soon. Last book I read was A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, and I loved this book. It was so good. It had me hooked throughout the whole thing. I could not stop reading. I am a person who gets scared super easily, so yes, I was scared throughout reading the whole book. Although the book isn't scary, like, it literally isn't scary, but I was just scared. The storyline was never boring. I never felt like I could put the book down and just read tomorrow. I felt like I had to keep reading because I just needed to know what happened. So what is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder about? It is about this girl who has a school project, and she decides to write it on this murder that happened in her town. This girl, a couple years older than her, she got murdered. The main character doesn't fully believe that her boyfriend killed her and then committed suicide. So she decides to write a report. on the murder, but really she ends up going through the clues again and unraveling the truth. Things I loved about this book was that I was entertained throughout the whole thing. There was no part of the book where I felt like I could put it down. I just had to know what was happening. I also loved the suspense. It was held throughout the whole book. There are parts of the book where it just kind of talks about the girl's life and kind of her family that aren't really super related to the case, and they were a little bit of like a breather, but also it jumped right back into her figuring out the case. I loved how the book was also written, where there were like pages of interviews, and then there were like transcripts of interviews, and then there were like pages of entries that she wrote regarding things she found, and then there were just like narratives about what she was doing and where she was going, and all of that together was just so good. Oh yeah, and also I went into reading this book knowing that it was a trilogy, and I was scared that I would have to read all 3 books to just find out who the murderer was. But if you read the first book, you can literally just end it there because it wraps up the whole mystery. Yeah, you can just read it as a standalone, and it's great. It's super good. And it's not super long either. There was one thing that I didn't like, and it was how she and the murderer's brother like each other. The romantic tension. Okay, I was not a big fan because I don't want to have to read books about something else, like in this case about solving a crime, where a guy and a girl who work together fall in love. Like, opposite genders don't have to fall in love. They don't have to have a romance plot. They can just be friends. This trope is used way too much in like every single book. If there's a guy and a girl and they work on a school project, they fall in love. Like, I don't like that. Can they just be friends? Because a relationship between friends is just as good as a romantic relationship, if not better, in my opinion. And I rather read about 2 friends solving cases than a couple solving cases, because I don't want to have any of the romance stuff be in that book while I'm trying to just read about who killed who or what happened. Like, I just so I was not a big fan of that. So 4 out of 5 stars. It's very good, very entertaining. I read it all in like 1 or 2 days, I forget. Super easy to go through. There was like nothing that was not relevant in that book. Very fun. You should read it. But now I want to talk about all the books that I want to read for the next season. Spring is coming up. Well, of course I want to finish this book because I've been reading it for forever. I have been reading a lot of romance, which is why I wasn't able to get through this, because I feel like I can't read too much romance at once. And then I also bought this box set. I'm so excited because look how cute. Look how cute it is. It's a Jane Austen box set, and I love the colors and designs. I think they actually have, yeah, they have a picture of like all the book covers on the back. I love it. It is so cute. I actually already read Pride and Prejudice, is that how you say it, in high school, and I was not the biggest fan, but I think I'm gonna reread it. I hope it changes my mind, because everyone I talked to loved that book and I did not, so maybe I just didn't get it the first time. I'm mostly excited to read Emma because I've heard a lot of good things about it. Oh, Dark Academia. I've been looking at all the Dark Academia books for almost 2 seasons now, but I haven't started because part of me feels like I'm not intelligent enough to understand the themes in Dark Academia, but I do have Babel on hold. Babel or Babel, I don't really know how to say the title. I do have that one on hold, so I'm gonna read that one. Contemporary, yes, I love contemporary. After I started reading again, I realized that I love contemporary and I want to read much more about just life, things going on in life. I also want to read the Sally Rooney books because there is so much hype around her and I just want to be in on it. So yeah, I also do want to do a couple of rereads of my favorite books back in grade school to see how I feel about them now. I think that would be super exciting. I am reading some of these books with a friend and we do talk about them after we read books, and that's super fun. So yeah. And I also want to show you guys my e-reader because I love it so much. So I got this for my birthday. My brother got it for me. I love it. I love that I can read my library books on it and I read it in bed. My eyes don't hurt because I used to read on my phone. I think the blue light or whatever light from my phone would strain my eyes and they would hurt so bad and I'd get migraines and stuff. Yeah, it's really useful. Like, I can read it this way, I can read it this way, and I love the buttons that lets me flip the page. I just like clicking buttons. So that's my e-reader that I read most of these. Actually, all of these books I read them on my e-reader, yeah.